It started with flashing blue lights cutting across. The calm surface of my lake, the same lake I had legally bought just a few weeks earlier. The HOA had called 911, claiming I was endangering the community by draining what they believed was their private property. But here's what they didn't know. The water wasn't theirs. It was a federally protected waterway, and their desperate attempt to control it was about to backfire in ways they couldn't imagine. That one false 911 call would expose years of corruption, lies, and abuse of power buried under the illusion of community. Rules. They wanted to make me the villain. But by the end, they wouldn't just lose the lake. They'd lose everything. What could go wrong when a lake isn't really theirs? When I first moved into Willow Ridge Estates, I thought I'd found peace. A quiet neighborhood hidden behind tall pine trees, with neatly trimmed lawns, smiling faces, and a lake that shimmered like glass under the morning sun. After 20 years of city noise and endless deadlines, this felt like freedom. The kind of place where time moved slower, and neighbors waved just because they could. My house sat near the end of a cul-de-sac, facing the western side of the lake. Every evening, the sunset painted the water in gold. It was perfect, almost too perfect. The realtor had called it a well-managed community. The HOA was strict, but organized. At the time, that didn't bother me. I'd dealt with city councils before. How bad could a homeowners association be? But what I didn't realize was that behind all the perfect, lawns and cheerful mailboxes was a quiet kind of control. One built not on fairness, but on fear. Perfect neighborhoods often hide imperfect truths. The HOA president, Marjorie Fields, was the kind of woman who treated every rule like it was her personal commandment. If your grass grew an inch too long, you'd get a letter. If your trash bin was visible for more than an hour, you'd get a fine. If your Christmas lights were still up in January, expect a written warning. She ruled with a smile that never reached her eyes. People followed not because they respected her, but because they were afraid of what would happen if they didn't. At first, I ignored it. I paid my dues, kept my property tidy, and minded my own business. All I wanted was peace by the water. Then, one morning, as I was reading the local bulletin, I saw something strange. A notice from the county land department. Several small lakes were being reviewed for sale. They weren't officially private properties. They were considered navigable waterways, open, for public ownership under federal law. And there it was, Willow Ridge Lake. Could a lake really be bought by a newcomer? I called the county office to confirm. Yes, it was available. Yes, it could be purchased by an individual. And yes, it was fully legal. So I filed the paperwork, paid the fees, and within weeks, I held the title deed in my hand. I had just become the legal owner of the lake. It felt surreal, peaceful even. I wasn't planning to change anything. I just wanted to maintain it properly. Maybe clean up the edges where algae had built up. But word travels fast in a small community. A week later, Marjorie was standing at my door. Her posture was perfect, her lips were pursed, and she was holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You can't buy our lake," she said coldly. "It belongs to the homeowners association." I showed her the documents, the deed, the registration, and the federal code sections confirming the sale. She didn't even look. Instead, she smiled, that same thin, calculated smile I'd seen before. "We'll see about that," she said, and turned to leave. I stood there in the doorway watching her walk away, not realizing that peace, the peace I'd come here searching for, was already gone. Because from that day forward, the lake wasn't just a piece of water anymore. It was the battlefield she was about to die defending. Ownership had just shifted. But the war was about to begin. It started small. Just a few letters slipped quietly into my mailbox. The first one read, "Violation, unauthorized use of community. Water, fine, $250. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of clerical mistake. But a week later, another arrived. Then another. The fines grew larger, $500, $1,000, each one citing obscure community codes that didn't even exist. Every letter was signed by one person, Marjorie Fields. When I emailed the board for clarification, they ignored me. When I demanded documentation, I got a reply saying, "Failure to comply will result in legal escalation." They weren't trying to correct me. They were trying to break me. Soon I began to notice things. HOA board members walking the shoreline with clipboards and cameras, snapping photos of my dock, my fence, and my boat. One evening, I even saw Marjorie herself, standing across the water with binoculars. The next day, a new violation notice appeared. Environmental damage, disrupting wildlife habitats. Apparently, my simple act of clearing debris near the shore had destroyed the natural ecosystem. It was absurd, but that didn't matter. The goal wasn't truth, the goal was control. Rumors spread quickly. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away. A few stopped speaking to me entirely. I heard whispers that I was polluting the lake, that I was hoarding community property. Marjorie had turned the neighborhood against me, painting me as the villain who stole their lake. And then came the moment everything exploded. The 911 call, the harassment, was just the opening salvo. Medium-long shot of Marjorie Fields and two HOA board members standing near the lake, holding clipboards and cameras. They photographed Daniel's dock from across the water. Daniel, in the distance, stands with arms folded, watching them silently. Lighting. Late afternoon, slightly desaturated tones to emphasize tension. Soon, I began noticing things more directly. Marjorie and her board members were walking the shoreline with clipboards and cameras, scrutinizing my property like detectives on a case. They photographed my dock, my fence, and even my boat. Every day brought new evidence of surveillance. One evening, I caught Marjorie herself standing across the water, binoculars pressed to her eyes, studying my every move. The invasion of privacy was relentless. The goal was no longer just intimidation, it was domination. Their obsession was escalating, and I could see it coming. Dramatic scene of two police cruisers parked near the lake gate. Lights flashing red and blue. Marjorie Fields, furious, is talking to an officer, gesturing toward the lake. Daniel Harper stands calmly beside his dock, holding papers, his ownership documents. The tension between calm confidence and angry authority dominates the frame. The breaking point came on a humid August evening. The HOA had called for an emergency community meeting. Flyers were pinned to every mailbox. Attendance was mandatory. I knew what it was about. Everyone did. For weeks, Marjorie had been whispering that she'd take back the lake, that she had evidence I'd falsified documents. But deep down, I knew she was bluffing. So I went, binder in hand. And then came the 911 call, summoning police to the lake, a futile attempt to intimidate me with authority. Outside forces were drawn into their desperate game. Powerful cinematic shot of Daniel Harper, installing a reinforced steel lock on the dock gate with a red sign reading, "Access restricted. Federal Waterway jurisdiction." His face is determined. The background shows HOA board members watching helplessly from behind a fence. Lighting, morning sunlight cutting through mist. Symbolic victory. I calmly went about, securing my property. Using the Federal Waterway codes as authority, I installed reinforced locks on the dock gate. A bold red sign declared, "Access restricted. Federal Waterway. Jurisdiction, Marjorie." And the board watched helplessly. From behind the fence, furious but powerless. For the first time, the control they had wielded for years was visibly slipping from their grasp. The tide had turned, and the lake was mine to protect. The tables had turned, and their power was slipping fast. The meeting was held in the clubhouse. Dozens of neighbors sat on folding chairs, murmuring. At the front stood Marjorie, flanked by board members, her usual smile gone, replaced by desperation. "Neighbors," she said, "a resident has illegally seized property that belongs to all of us." Every head turned toward me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. The showdown everyone feared had finally arrived. I stood, binder in hand. "Before you vote, see this." I opened it to every notice. "Fine and fraudulent claim against me, plus official deeds and Federal Waterway rulings." The room went silent. Marjorie froze. "This," I said, "is what happens when you bully the wrong person." Truth had finally stepped into the room. Marjorie stormed out, humiliated. The HOA began to crumble. Half the board resigned. Audits started, investigations opened. For the first time in months, the lake was quiet, still, mine. The power had shifted, and consequences were real. Willow Ridge changed. Neighbors waved again. The county audit exposed missing funds, Marjorie was removed, and the HOA lost all authority over the lake. A new public use permit allowed residents to enjoy the water legally. The lake finally became what it was always meant to be: peaceful. Justice restored. The lake finally belonged to its rightful owner.